I'm going to add a new package to this existing data flow project. So I'll go over here to Solution Explorer and right-click on SSIS Packages and say New SSIS Package. And that gives it the default name of package1.dtsx. I'll come back over here to Solution Explorer, single click on that, and change the name to Transforms. Okay, so we're good to go, have a brand new package that we're going to use for this new data flow. First thing I need to do, of course, is create the data flow. Double click on it there, and then double click on it to open up the data flow tab. So the first thing I need to do is add a flat file source. That's because I need to read the data from a .txt file. So I'll come back over here to the SSIS toolbox, and I need a data source, other sources, and flat file source. So I'll double click on that, and there's that flat file source. Now I'm going to have another flat file source, so I want to rename this so I can keep them straight. So I'll single click on that there, and I'm just going to say flat file dash silvers. Because as you're going to see, this is going to read all of the data for products that are the color silver. Okay, now I need to double click on that and configure the component. First thing I need to do, of course, is create a connection manager. I don't have any yet, so I'll click on the New button there. And first of all, I'll give it a meaningful name. So I'm going to call this Flat File Silvers. Sounds like I'm reading something having to do with silver salmon or something. And then I'm going to use the Browse button here in order to navigate to the location where I have that file. And that's actually in Learn Now, SSIS, Samples, Data Flow, Silver Items. Okay, so I've specified the location of that data. I want to make sure that this item is checked because that text file does in fact have the column names in the first data row. That's important because that's going to identify the column names that are used in the data flow pipeline. I also want to specify or click the Unicode button to tell the connection manager that the data is in that format, as Unicode data. All right, so notice that I'm not done configuring things, and I know that because the columns are not defined for this connection manager. So as long as this warning icon appears here and the message at the bottom, there's more that I need to do. And generally it gives me a good idea of what I need to do left in order to configure this file. But other things that I can do are change the format, delimited, fixed width, ragged right, change the text qualifier. Most often that's going to be a single double quote if you have double quotes around some of the data. The header row delimiter, number of header rows to skip. Sometimes you have additional rows at the top of the file that you need to skip. So you have all those kinds of options in order to customize or widen the possibilities for the types of text files that you can import. All right, so next thing we need to do is come over here to Columns. This is where you can review how Integration Services is going to split up the columns of data. You really want to make sure that everything looks right, because if you selected wrong delimiters, wrong row delimiters, other things in the previous page, the general page, this data can look messed up. So product ID, that looks pretty good. The names all look pretty good. Product number, column. Okay, it kind of looks like all of the data is in the right columns. So that's good. But here I can also change the row delimiter and the column delimiter as well. As you can see, I have various options for each of those. Okay, but in this case, because the data looks okay here, that all looks fine. And interestingly enough, just by selecting this page, the warning message has disappeared. So essentially, the designer is telling you, hey, you got to look at the columns, make sure the data is okay, and once you do that, then I'm good with it. All right, now go to the Advanced page. This is where you can modify the data types and sizes of the columns that Integration Services creates in the data flow pipeline. This is where you really define the schema of the data within the pipeline. Now, by default, it sets everything to a Unicode string of length 50. So if I scroll down, you can see Unicode string 50, name, product number, color, and so forth. Okay. That's fine. It's going to work for this example. But that's not always the case. Because, for example, the product name may have longer than 50 characters. But it doesn't know that because it hasn't gone through and checked everything. What you can do is use this Suggest Types button here. And what it'll do is, in this case, by default, it'll look at 200 rows of data, depending on how many rows that you have in there. And then suggest this, you can have options for suggesting the smallest integer data type that will work for that column, suggesting the small real data type, identify Boolean columns using the following values. I have a client that I work with, and they have some input data where true is 1 and false is 0. So I always have to go in and change that setting there when I import data of that particular type. And then you can also pad the string columns and add a percentage of padding. Now you're not limited to 200. You can set this number as high as you want. Just be aware, as you start getting above 1,000 or a couple thousand rows, it can take some time for read all the rows, look at the length of the data, and then suggest the different data types. Because essentially what it's going to do, I'm not going to do it in this case, but what it'll do is it'll modify the information here based on what it finds in the number of columns that you allow it to inspect. Now, the results may still need tweaking. So you want to go through each of these columns and check and make sure that everything looks okay. Because sometimes a number will end up being a string or a string being a number or whatever. So it's a handy tool. It's a very nice shortcut for simplifying things, but it's not perfect. Okay, so that's everything I need to do within this dialog box. So I'll click on OK. And notice that the warning message has gone away here as well. And now I can look at the columns here. This again lets you select the fields to include in the data flow. And you can optionally rename any or all columns. In this case, I'm going to include all of the columns with their names as defined in the text file. So I'll just click on OK at this point, and we've configured our flat file data source. Okay, now I need to repeat those steps for the second data file. So I'll come back over here, another flat file source, and I'll move this to right next to the other one as near as I can. And I'll once again double click on it. I have an existing flat file Silvers. That's the only one I have. But this time I need to read a different file. So I'm going to do New. In this case, name it Flat File Reds, because this has all of the products that are color red. I'll browse here. See, I have a red items. Double click on that. I'll select again Unicode. All of these other options are fine, just as they were the first time. That column is selected. That's correct. That looks good. And there are the columns. And once again, everything looks pretty good. I created both of these text files from the AdventureWorks database, just filtering out different color products. So the files are fairly similar, although as you'll see shortly, there are different numbers of rows within each column. And then once again can look at advanced, suggest types, and do all that again. But again, the Unicode string, 50 characters wide, works for this simple example. Okay, so I have that flat file connection manager there. And now I can look at columns. I want to once again include all of the columns and click on OK. Okay, one thing I forgot to do was to rename this. Hopefully I didn't forget anything else. So I'll use the same pattern and say Reds. Okay, so I've configured both of the data sources that I need for this data flow. So I'll go ahead and save that package. And now I need to combine the data flows from the two sources. And to do that, I'm going to use a union all transformation. So as you can see, this is in the common set of transformations. They're broken up into two different groups. These are definitely some transformations that you're going to use a little bit less often. But I'm going to use union all, so I'll double click to add it. And I'll put it down below here. And I'm going to union together the sources from both of these flat file data sources. So I need to connect the data flow pipeline to both of them to this union all transformation. So this is a case where I'm taking two different pipelines, two different streams of data, and this transformation is going to combine the two pipelines into a single pipeline. So we're going to have a single output. All right, so I'll double click on that, and that opens up this Union All Transformation Editor. And here basically I'm mostly concerned with just making sure that the columns match up. Again, I created both of these files from a single table in AdventureWorks, and I use the same column names so they match up. That may not always be the case depending on the sources of the data. So you want to be careful to make sure that the two match up. Sometimes you'll get a mismatch where this size won't match up with size here because the name is different or a little bit different or so forth. But then also you can define different output column names. So if I didn't want size, I wanted extents or something like that, I can click on it there and change that field name and do that with all of the output column names. So again, this is the input from one source, one of the flat files. This is from another, and this is going to be the output of the Union All transformation. All right, there's nothing that I want to change here, so I can just click on OK. But one thing about this transformation is that it's based on the union keyword in TransactSQL. And that means that all the data types for each column in order must be compatible with the number of columns in all the data flows that you're unioning. They all have to match. And you can have additional data flows as well. You're not limited to just two. And that sometimes can be a bit tricky to make work in a data flow. But if you're careful, you can use other transformations before the Union All transformation, doing data type conversions, changing, you don't need to change the name of columns necessarily, rearranging columns and so forth. So you can transform the data before it gets to Union All, maybe just for one of the 5 pipelines that are coming into this transformation, but in order to get it to match up so that it can successfully execute a union on all of the pipelines. And the nice thing too is that the Union All Transformation Editor dialog box lets you ignore fields in any or all flows, and that can help you match things up. Okay? So just make sure they all match, and notice that if you select them, you can choose to ignore a particular field. So if I don't want to include this, I can specify ignore. And that's particularly applicable, and actually some of them will be ignored by default if the different pipelines have different names. And then you can just match up the names as you need to in order to make it all consistent. Okay, don't need to do anything there, so I'll just click on OK, and now Union All has now combined those two pipelines, or will when I execute it, into a single pipeline. Okay, the next thing I want to do is sort the pipeline, sort the data in the pipeline. So I'm going to, where's it, right there? Double click on that, add that, and right there. Now, generally, it's not necessary to sort a data flow, but some transformations do require sorted data, such as the merge-join transformation. Or you just may want your output sorted in a particular way. So I need to join that to the Union All. And now they're connected. And so the sort transformation has all of the information about the schema of the data that is coming as the output of Union All. Now, just keep in mind that the sort transformation is notoriously slow. If at all possible, you want to retrieve the data from the data source already sorted. So if it's coming from relational tables, the query that you use in order to extract the data, you want to use the order by clause, if it's at all possible. Okay, so I need to configure this, so I'll double click on it. And now I need to specify how I want the data sorted. So I want the data sorted first by name and then by color. So I'll choose them in that particular order. And notice that it adds it to the grid down here, the input column, output alias. So I can change the output column alias there if I want. I can also specify to sort it in ascending or descending order. Ascending works for this data. And then I can change the sort order here. Because I selected name first, it made that 1, color second, it made that 2. But if I decide that I need to change that, I can select it and change the order. And then there's different comparison flags that you can use to ignore case and so forth. Okay, so that gets into some particular collation types of issues. Okay, another thing to look at here is this column right here, this pass-through column. If I unselect any of these, then that data is not going to be passed through to the output. So this is a way that I can filter out any columns that I don't want to be passed on in the pipeline from this point on. And then I also have this option down here of removing rows with duplicate sort values. So that can be a useful function at times. Okay, click on OK, and now the sort transformation is fully configured. And I also want to add some information about the environment, about this package and so forth. And that's really easy with the audit transformation. So I'll drag that over here, put it out to the side, and I'll connect that as the next step after the sort. So what this audit transformation does is it lets you add columns to the data flow that contain information about the package and its execution. Now notice that I don't have a red X. By default, it doesn't output any data, but it doesn't require me to. But that's kind of boring. So I'm going to start selecting some different things here. Audit type. So what I want to output is the package name. Add another row for the execution start time. And another one for the machine name. It's the name of the machine on which this is executing, no matter what servers or whatever it's accessing data from. And then also specify that I want the task name. All right, and as you can see, there's a number of other items that you can include. So this can be very helpful debugging information, particularly as your packages get more complex and you execute multiple packages together. So sometimes it can be very difficult to pinpoint where a problem is occurring, particularly if the problem doesn't manifest itself as an error, but in some problem with the data that is output from the package. All right, so I'll click on OK, and when I do and execute the package, there are going to be 4 new columns that are going to be output with those column names with that data. All right, that's all the transformations that I need. So now I need to add a destination. And I'm going to put this into an Excel file. So I'll come back over here to the SSIS toolbox. There's the Excel destination, and I'll drag that onto the data flow surface. And I'm going to use the pipeline as it comes out of audit, so I'll connect that there. And now this destination has all the schema information for the pipeline as it's been modified through all of these transformations. Okay, I'll double click on it, need to configure it. Notice that I don't have any existing Excel connection managers. I haven't created any yet. So I'll click on New, and I need to specify the file path where I want this to be output to. So I need to put this in a convenient location. Let's see, samples, data flow, that's LearnNow. I just need to remember where it is. Okay, that's a good location for it. So I'll click there, whoops, and define the file name as joined silver reds. And click on Open, and it puts the file path and file name in the Excel file path text box. And then I can also modify the Excel version, but I just made an XLS file. That's an easier way to work with things. And that's the Excel 97 to 2003. But as you can see, I can change to different versions. Notice it only goes up to Excel 2007, so it's not really up to date for later versions of Excel. Oops, didn't want to change that. Okay, and specify that the first row has column names. So I'll include those within the spreadsheet. Click on OK, and I'm back in the Excel destination editor. Okay, I can look at the name of the Excel sheet and notice that the only option I have is no tables or views can be loaded. The spreadsheet doesn't exist yet. So there's no worksheet to be found. So I need to create one. So I'm going to click on New there. And what this does is it creates this create table statement. Notice that it's using transact SQL, or SQL actually, in order to define how this data is going to be formatted within the Excel spreadsheet. So the one change that I want to make here is not call it a generic Excel destination, but instead call it products. But I could also change the names of fields. These are the column names that are going to appear in the spreadsheet. I can change those and make basic changes like that. Remove fields if I want and so forth. And I'll click on OK. And I get this dialog box that says, or message box that says, please select the new Excel sheet from the drop-down list box. Any white space in the Excel sheet name may have been replaced by underscores. Because I've created it, but now I need to select it. So I'll select products. All right, notice that I'm still not done configuring the component. I have this message down here, map the columns on the mappings page. So I'll come over here to mappings, and this looks at the available input columns there and matches them up to the available destinations. Now hopefully these all match because I created that create table statement that just read the column names from the data flow pipeline coming into this destination. So hopefully they all match, and it turns out that they do. But I can scroll down here, make sure that everything matches up, all the names are the same. But this really gets into if I start changing names for the output. That's where it becomes a problem. But once again, the designer just wanted me to look at this to make sure it was okay, so the message is gone. So I finished configuring that Excel destination. Okay, save the work, and I'll execute the package. And with any kind of luck, yeah, there we go. So notice that we got 36 rows from the flat file silvers, 38 rows from the flat file reds. They were unioned together to create a data flow pipeline of 74 rows. They were sorted, 74 rows came out. Went through the audit, so it added those 4 additional fields. And 74 rows were written out to that Excel destination. So as you can see, this is an awful lot of work for just dragging and dropping components and really just clicking a few properties in each component to configure each of the components. Okay, I'm going to stop debugging. And then I can go over to Windows Explorer, and notice I have this new joined silver reds. I can double click that. I have the Microsoft Excel viewer here, and you can see all of the data. I can try and double click that. Okay, I guess that doesn't work like it does in Excel. I wanted to widen that a little bit. Okay, it's not working all that well. But anyway, so I have the product names, the different colors. They're sorted by name and color. And if I scroll down here, you can see that I have 75 rows of data, including the lines. So there's a total of 74 rows of data.